and I'll just walk through it again
Sure.
for the general public to know. So we have the budget coming up on the floor today, and as everyone knows, the Appropriations Committee has been working feverishly on getting that ready. We had included in our letter to appropriations back a month or so ago our requests for dollar amounts, and we'd also included some language that talked about the program that was originally $10 million for meat, produce, and maple processing. Had been, we had a somewhat smaller dollar amount. In its work, appropriations didn't get that language into the bill, and realized after the fact that they hadn't gotten it in and hadn't had time to fully consider it. So they asked us to draw up an amendment, essentially. So good morning, Representative Levitt.
Good morning.
We did that, and we talked about that yesterday. We had Ledge Council come in, and it was a strike all amendment. And afterwards, I realized when I was looking at it, looking at what had been struck in the strike all amendment, that there was language that had been in the original budget proposal that that talked about a dollar amount for staffing to basically administer the grants. And I think to maybe do some outreach. So as it stands right now, the budget language and the amendment that we have proposed, with the amendment we have proposed removes that language. It's still in the underlying budget that's out there. So we wanted to try and figure out what to do, and whether the agency had additional thoughts now that the budget number from appropriations for this program has been reduced to $5 million. That's one consideration. We know there's other things that have changed too. I think that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that the original budget had 133,000, and I think maybe in testimony it was a slightly smaller number, but in any case, it was a number, and that number is not there in our amendment. So, with that as background, good morning and thank you for coming in, and please share with us your thoughts.
Sure. Well, thank you. Anson Tebbets from the Agency of Agriculture, along with Abby Willard from the Agency of Agriculture. Thank you for the update. As you mentioned, I guess when it landed and it's going to hit the floor this afternoon, our original request was for 10 million and it landed at 5 million. So I think this amendment, of course, makes tremendous progress, from our perspective, getting it up to another level. Of course, we'd love the full 10 million. But, no, I think this gets it up to, it's encouraging news on that front. As for the language, we're always a little nervous when we don't have dollars to get the money out the door, process the grants. So that, and Abby can speak to that a little bit as well. That always makes me a little nervous because in the end, it will just take longer to get the money to the people that need it. Because just for perspective, our business office is a team of 3. So if we could have some dollars to, temporary workers to help with, reviewing grants, processing and getting those vetted and approved, because we know these dollars are precious. So we want to make sure that, taxpayers are protected as well, making sure these grants applications that come in are vetted and done properly. And then the other end of it is actually getting the checks and the grants and the grant agreements. That's the other part of it. That's probably the heaviest is because of the requirements of tax dollars, there's grant agreements. So that's just a bit of concern there. And I'd like to learn more about limiting it, the maple to 25%. That's the only, I just don't have a grasp of what that means and why you're going that level. I'm not opposed to it. I would just love to know more about what you're thinking there. That's all. So,
okay, good. Before we get to that, what do you thinking about the dollar amount that you would need now at a $5 million level?
You mean for staffing?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Abby Willard, for the record, Agency of Agriculture. What was originally in the language was $125,000 or up to $125,000, which would be towards a temporary staff capacity to help both with, as Secretary Tibbetts described, both drafting the funding opportunity and then getting the grant agreements out the door to the businesses, as well as doing the promotion and outreach of our funding opportunity to more marginalized populations. That concept probably doesn't change much in need, even if there's fewer grant dollars to award. So within the Ag Development Division, currently, we put out between $10 and $20 million in the last fiscal year. And we have 3 staff people that do that on the grants and contracts side. So adding a portion of a temporary staff person to accompany that one-time appropriation, whether we're talking 5 million or 8 million or 10 million, is still really critical to sort of address the timeliness that the Secretary mentioned of getting it out as quickly as possible, promoting it, and then once we have all the applications, drafting out all those agreements as quickly as we can.
Representative Rice?
Yeah, you spoke to a lot of what I was just going to ask, but maybe there's more you could
Sure.
help inform us about, just sort of like how you come to that. So you've got a $10 million ask and you say, okay, $125,000 is what it's going to take in staffing to get that out. How do you come to that sort of determination about how much? And then is there a point at which, okay, $5 million is the same as 10 million, but is $1 million the same as 10,
Yeah, it's a fair question. So imagining this new funding opportunity is what we call it, or a new program. We would need we would create program staff capacity within the agency that would be kind of like the creative mind behind how are we going to craft this funding opportunity? What's all the language and eligibility? What does the request for proposals look like? And then, and we would utilize internal staff to do that. So we have really solid program staff that would do that work in consort with the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative staff that also do that work. Once that language has been drafted, then it gets sent to our grants and contracts team. And our grants and contracts team then creates a funding opportunity within our web grants program. So we have a portal that all applicants apply through, and they have to register and then they submit their application through that portal. There's that creation, and then we open the funding opportunity. And actually, before we open it, we actually announce the funding opportunity and we say, here's what the request for proposal looks like. Applications will be beginning to be received in 1 week. So that gives applicants, or 2 weeks, it gives applicants an opportunity to read the language, think about their eligibility, confirm whether they want to actually apply. And they get to kind of do that kind of internal business decision making. And then we launch the funding opportunity. And that means that then the portal is open for applicants to submit their applications. And they usually have, 4 to 8 weeks to submit their application. Once the funding opportunity closes, that means we no longer accepting any more applications. And so then there may be, 100 applications in the system, which that's when that staff person, that temporary staff person that we proposed would then collect all those responses, and they start organizing who's eligible, what their funding request was for, what their match request was that they contributed, and putting it all into a spreadsheet to then share it with our review committee, because then we create a review committee that includes internal staff and external staff that review every application. We actually have 3 reviewers that review every application. And then the applicants submit, or the reviewers submit their scores on each application. And that position organizes all the application scores by all the reviewers, gives an average score, puts all the comments that are made by all the reviewers, and then we have a review meeting. And so that position puts all of that content into a spreadsheet and shares it at a review meeting. So those are just to give you an example of some of the tasks that are completed, again, whether there's 10 million or 5 million. I think if we get down to 1 million potentially, we probably could do that with the existing staff that we have. But still, because it's a new funding opportunity and it's different from everything that we already do, it still requires each of those steps independently from the work that our existing team is already doing.
Representative Templeman.
I was just wondering, does this mean the hiring of new staff?
So what we imagined was that it would be a temporary position. So
Okay.
we would not, because it's a one-time appropriation, we weren't adding to the permanent team within the division, but we would be adding capacity to help do this stand-up of a new funding opportunity, which I described the first part, which is then just getting us through to the review meeting. And then following that review meeting, then we're deciding who are we granting to? And then we have to draft individual granting agreements with each of those grant recipients. And that too takes a lot of time from the program manager to outline what are the goals, the objectives, and the measures of success for each of those grantees. And then that gets written into a grant agreement. That grant agreement gets submitted to the grantee for signature and for the agency for signature. And then we launch that agreement with that individual business is then live. Then they have to do the work and submit us invoices and submit us reports and invoices. So there's fair amount of work that happens in both the standing up of a new program, the launching of a new opportunity, and then the creation of the agreements with however many recipients. Because we imagined that this program for Meat Maple and produce was going to be larger grants, so looking at like larger investments, there would still be fewer number of agreements, which was one of the reasons why we were thinking the Working Lands program has those, $20,000 to $35,000 business enterprise grants. We were thinking of being larger than that. So looking at, in that $100,000 or larger range, which also means we have fewer agreements to process for those small and mid-scale businesses that could be applying. So I forget what we said. It could be between
40, 60.
40 and 50, 40 and 60 awards. Which that's a significant amount of work for someone to kind of put together.
Would you still honor that number? It would just be a smaller amount awarded?
That was the proposal when the budget was 10 million. So it
Right.
would probably be, it could be smaller than that. We've also talked about and had conversations that maybe we might do we could imagine doing 2 tiers of funding. So between, like 100 or 75,000 and 200,000 could be one tier, and then still do some of those larger investments that would be up to $500,000. So that may mean that because we are considering lowering the floor, that still may be in the range of 30 to 40 agreements, even with a smaller total budget amount. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure who was next. Representative O'Brien.
Just to play devil's advocate, legislative council pointed out that the agency got a whole lot of money out during COVID, the CRF funds, I think,
Yeah.
the dairy farmers with no additional
Yeah,
staff, which may be because it was all hands on deck and
it sure was.
weekends and
Yeah.
all nighters.
I'll tell you how many hours staff worked every single week that
Yeah.
summer and fall. We're not going to do that again. I'm just not going to ask my staff to do it. I just don't think it's fair. That was a crisis situation and everybody was all hands on deck. And people worked weekends, they worked holidays, they worked evenings. And I don't think that's not kind of the expectation for an ongoing kind of arrangement,
Yeah.
even if it's for a one-time appropriation. But yeah, I mean, the team was unbelievable, but it took a toll on
I think it
people.
was 30 or 40 people were working on it.
Yeah, they worked 60 plus hours a week for months.
It was it 36 million too at the time. So, but there was a lot
Yeah.
of, it was a little more complicated as well because we had federal restrictions and a lot of boxes had to be checked and a lot of documents had to be submitted. So that was.
Yeah, it was very
A lot of people on the phone and talking with farmers and producers, but yeah. So this is a little different.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the crisis situation is the differentiating factor of like, the goal was to get the money out as quickly as we possibly could. We didn't have time to actually hire any temporary staff. If we could have, we probably would have, but we weren't in that situation. Yeah.
Representative Levitt.
2 quick questions.
Yeah.
One, grants up to 500,000 for this kind of made my eyebrows go up because how many grants up to 500,000 are you thinking? Because that really limits the number of grants that can be given for a $5 million grant. And also how reasonably, what's the word? Do you think you can reasonably hire a temporary worker? I've been hearing that there are 800 MD positions in the state, in state government. Is this a position you think you could hire for in a timely enough way to be efficient and provide you what you need?
Yeah, good questions. So on the $500,000 cap, for example, the Working Lands program is just now making some final decisions on the ARPA appropriations that we received for FY '23. And so we are putting out $1 million in ARPA awards sometime in the next month. And we received many applications of project proposals that were capped at $250,000. And many of those businesses had that much or more in match. And so it's demonstrating to us the infrastructure needs of even many of our small and mid-scale businesses, that if they're making major innovation improvements or major facility expansions, that those projects are $500,000 or more in total, like budget cost. So that was sort of the vision of this, was like, let's do fewer number of agreements, bigger investments, focus on infrastructure, focus on the innovation that these businesses have in mind and have been sort of like holding off because they didn't have the resources to do. So yes, it would be fewer number of awards, but the data has demonstrated that we have businesses that are wanting to make that scale of investment.
So we're looking at 10 grants.
If they were all at 500,000, which they wouldn't be, and that's why we're saying if it were a smaller total award, we're looking at exploring 2 tiers. So one that would be a smaller award at up to, again, I haven't finalized it, but thinking, like up to from like $75,000 to $150,000 or 200,000, and then there would be another tier that would be the 200 to 500. As for like our ability to hire a temporary employee in a timely manner, I would hope that we'd be able to. I think that there are people that are interested in doing this type of work. Our goal would be, as soon as the appropriation is passed, that then we could start the hiring process. So we can have a job description ready to go for a temporary employee. It can be a relatively more expeditious process than hiring a full-time permanent position. So I'd hope that we can. I mean, obviously, I can't guarantee that.
I hope so too.
Yeah, the application pool that we would receive, but I would think that we could do it.
Abby, how temporary would these positions be? How many weeks or months, given the entire process?
Yeah, so I think what we had contemplated is that it could be part-time for, a year. So they would be, not a full-time position, but that it would be working 20 hours a week or something close to that for over a year's period of time. And that was how we came up with the $125,000 figure. So again, they would have like intense periods of like the standing up of the funding opportunity, the managing the review process, the drafting of the grant agreements. And then depending upon where we were with time, they could also possibly be engaged in, as reports come in, kind of tallying impact and metrics of accomplishment from grantees. Because that's another big part of the process, is then as reports come in, like what's been the accomplishments and impact of the work.
And it would be 2, did you say 2 staff or 3?
It would be one. It'd be one person.
One person, okay.
Yeah.
And the 125,000 covers even that just sounds like for a part-time person, a lot, but that's.
It's temporary, not part-time. So it's.
It sounded like it was temporary and part-time.
Well, I think we were saying it would be part-time hours and temporary, both. So it would be 20 hours a week I think we did it for 18 months, assuming that they would get us through the granting launch period and then some of the reporting and tracking of impact.
Representative Lipsky.
This is, I'd like to honor Secretary Tabbitt's initial inquiry as to why this committee put a 25% cap on Maple. And
just before we get to that, and we will certainly honor that. I want to be sure that if the committee has any other questions on the staffing piece, that we're comfortable with what the administration has to say. So, yeah.
Well, it's not on the staffing piece. It was on the
Hold it
working
then.
lands grant one.
Okay, hold that question to you then, Representative O'Brien.
Maybe not so much on staffing, but could some of these, but the program, these dollars be used as matches?
Unjust.
If there's like an NRCS grant for Maple, could this grant be used potentially as a match?
I mean, potentially, I think it depends upon the requirements of the other programs as what they can use for match.
There's no limitations on, I mean, as long as they meet your,
Yeah, as long as this is, it's state money, not federal funds, so then it should be able to be used as match for a federal award, like through NRCS or something else.
right.
Yeah, so we don't put any restrictions on what they can use it for as match. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's been helpful and if they have private financing, if they get some, it helps. If there's a bigger project, this really helps with getting private financing as well. So it's important.
Quickly, just doing math.
Yeah.
It's like, this is a $75,000 part-time job by doing the math as quickly as I did. That seems like a lot of money for a 20-hour-a-week job. Just throwing it out there.
Yeah, I mean,
125 isn't just salary, right? It's
right, salary and benefits, yeah, includes, yeah.
But part-time or 20 hours a week gets benefits? I thought it had to be 32 to get benefits.
That's a good question. I guess I'd have to bring our business office in for that specific question.
I'm just trying
Yeah.
to figure out how much this is gonna cost, because for 20 hours a week, 125,000 feels like a lot.
Yeah, I mean, again, I probably should have checked with our business office when we figured that dollar figure. It was based on knowing that it was going to be a temporary position, didn't mean that it needed to be 40 hours a week and that it would be greater than a year's time to kind of capture everything that I described in the scope. But maybe I'm lacking some details that I'd have to get back to you on.
I'll apply for that.
I mean, I don't think that's what it would be. It would not be a $75,000 a year position. Like, we built it out based on like what we typically pay part of our grants and contract staff. So it's based on a salary in state government that's like very attributable to other people doing similar work.
So just to be clear then, and I'm asking for your, input on this, what would be most helpful? So understanding that the position you originally envisioned, you feel it's still needed, just as much as it was originally envisioned. And I think we've heard, reasonable arguments supporting that. Understanding that the cost isn't, you might not know the cost today, and we're not going to be able to know the cost by this afternoon. Language that says up to a dollar amount, would that be? Is that?
I think that's what it did originally say, was up to $125,000.
Okay, good.
So no more than that would be spent on staffing.
Okay.
Because again, I mean, I'll be honest, like, our objective is not to build more staffing if we don't need it. We want to see as many of the dollars go out to support businesses, but we also want to be realistic that if we want this to happen expeditiously and we want it to happen in a season, in 1 year season, we will need additional capacity to help get that award out the door.
I mean, I think we're all on the same page there. Sorry. So, Representative O'Brien?
Would this give you flexibility to potentially hire 2 part-time people if they called for that?
And yeah, I mean, I think it could. I guess I really do have to talk back with the business office to recall all the logistics of what we were imagining. I think we were giving ourselves flexibility to see, like, might there be someone that's just looking for part-time work? Could we add someone that may be working for some other agency that wants to add more time? I don't think we wanted to box ourselves into one scenario until we were in the moment and had the opportunity to explore how to do it as quickly as possible.
And you don't even know the sort of auditing tail of it, how long that would go potentially too, right?
The auditing tail?
As far as the recipients getting back to you with.
Oh, you mean like the tracking of the impact? Yeah, I mean, I don't imagine that this temporary employee would be on long enough to make it through to the final report from the grantees, but at least just the thought was to get us through maybe the first interim report to sort of set up maybe a tracking system for how we were going to track metric and impact. But yeah, no, I don't think that we would be able to keep the capacity for 2 years, which is probably what it would take from when the grants are authorized to when they're completed. When the funding is authorized to when the projects are completed.
Okay, good. Okay, so I think we've got those questions covered. Just to, as Representative Lipsky said, honor your question, and committee members can feel free to chime in here, but I think that generally we started out with a sense that maybe we should be really focusing entirely on meat and produce, but then there was we're not entirely comfortable with that either for various reasons, and ended up at the maple being a significant portion of the funding, but wanted to cap it at 25 so that there was enough for meat and produce, which is where I think overall we felt that's where we wanted the emphasis to be. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that's.
No, that's helpful. The reason I'm asking is if we get to the finish line of crafting the program, it would be helpful for us as we develop, we know we're going to have a certain pocket for maple, so maybe the requirements for maple would be a little different. So that's some of the knowledge I'd like to have if we get to the finish line on this.
Yeah, I mean, the $400,000 or $500,000 projects, I don't know whether that you've mentioned, I don't know whether any of those might have been maple projects, but I think we just wanted to be sure that there was significant funding available for the other two areas, and it didn't disproportionately go towards maple. Representative Lipsky.
Yeah, I'm just going to speak to my recollection as what this committee room was sensing. One, primarily that the biggest bottleneck that we were hearing about over the last 2.5 months had to do with meat processing in state. So for farmers to bring cattle to New Hampshire to get processed and then maybe not be able to have that Vermont food for Vermont schools. That bottleneck sort of stood out, one observation. The other is transitioning into, from some farms that are pulling out of dairy and looking at produce and or beef, that still spoke to help for transitioning. And the third piece, whether it's truth or science or not, was the sense that maple generally is emerging as one of the most profitable and successful and expanding agricultural sectors in Vermont. It was sort of simple thinking that maybe they wouldn't need as much help as some of these more bottlenecked or emerging. End of my comment.
Understand. That's helpful.
Thank you.
Representative Templeman and then Representative Pearl, and then I think we'll probably. Oh, sorry, Representative Supranat was.
Maybe Heather goes before I do because she had.
Peripheral vision, yeah. Representative Supranat.
Thank you so much. If we may circle back to the working lands portion of that granting program, where you said that obviously, of course, it's oversubscribed, but you were finding that there were folks who were interested in that $250,000 bracket, and they equally had the matching requirement to meet that. I'm wondering if you can recall what sector of agriculture that was looking for those massive infrastructure improvement grants, and the size of those farms, because I know that working lands doesn't necessarily determine who is eligible based on the size of the farm. It's really more the proposed project at hand. So I'm just curious if you know the size, if you know what sector of ag was going for that, and then I do a follow-up.
Yeah, so I can't answer all of your questions because we're just reviewing those final applications this week. So I reviewed 3 this week as part of my review slate. And one of them was a produce operation or diversified operation that does livestock and produce and is wanting to do more storage. And they talked about having previously stored product at another facility, and it all the temperature was incorrect, and so they lost all their product. And so now instead of storing offsite, they want to store onsite. They want to also do some value-added production. So rather than have to, store cabbage all winter long, they want to make sauerkraut as a way to kind of have a more value-added product. So, and they also wanted to do, there was some other.
There was firewood, wasn't there?
Yeah, so we've had some large firewood, kind of forestry applications. We've definitely had large in that $500,000 category in the meat slaughter and processing capacity. So either doing it on farm, or bringing in, other poultry to kind of bring out the facility on a particular location, but take animals from another farm.
In the past, I know there was one that probably was $250,000. It was centered around wood pellets. A dormant plant in near the border had to be reopened, and we helped support it getting open again, and it's supporting some low grade lumber, supporting that as well. But I think historically, the two categories that really take a lot of money are the wood products world, and also the other one would be meat and slaughter. It doesn't take too long to get a piece of machinery that's pretty expensive. So that's historically, those are kind of the operations. And but I know the wood products, some of that equipment is pretty pricey.
Great, thank you. And it was mentioned that perhaps as you're developing the maple criteria, that you would make it distinct from the produce and meat portion of it. And I'm wondering if there would be similar conversations around considering that for produce, considering that 420 farms or 428 farms report making less than 25,000 in annual sales. There are 12 farms that report that 500,000 to 1 million. And so as we're considering that matching, the potential to have a matching requirement, I'm just wondering, what is the potential that those produce farms would be able to meet that? And if that is something that, because these are massive grants, right? These are large chunks, and the produce sector arguably has less costly infrastructure. It's one of the easier sectors of agriculture to enter in with less, especially if you're doing it on a scale that is smaller. And a lot of these grants are supposed to be developed for the small and medium-sized producers. So I'm just curious how that'll shake out, really, because that is a massive amount of money for farms where there are 12 who are making that annual sale threshold.
Yeah, trying to think the best avenue to respond to your question. We may have a misconception around the opportunity that exists within the produce community and the infrastructure investments that they need. So one of the exercises that we did, and I shared with Chair Durfee, I don't know if the full committee ended up seeing this, but it was, we looked at where have we made investments in the meat, maple, and produce sectors, and what are we able to project as their infrastructure needs over the next 3 years. And we compared that to dairy. We have, as an agency, and with support, and we looked at the Agency of Agriculture, both our relief programs, our working lands programs, our other state and federal dollars, as well as the CIP and CRRP program that Commerce leads. So that was sort of the box of funding that we were looking at. And we looked at USDA meat investments. And we said, okay, how much has been invested in recent years in these 4 sectors? In maple, we've invested less than $1 million in the industry, which is a pretty abysmal commitment to the largest maple, consuming state in the country. In produce, we invested $4.8 million. In meat, slaughter, and processing capacity expansion, we invested $4.1 million. And in dairy, we invested over $25 million. Then we looked at like a projection over the next 3 years of what are the infrastructure needs within those sectors. They range between $46 million and $55 million, whether you're talking about dairy or you're talking about produce. And so for the produce sector in particular, because that's what you're asking about, Representative Supranat, many produce operations have been operating in old dairy facilities that are not particularly suited for the type of production that they're doing. And as they're expanding and wanting to look to new markets or think about wholesale or take on food safety requirements, they actually need a significant amount of improvement to their operation. If we're just talking about, wash pack lines or infrastructure or, facility improvements. If they wanted to actually do value-added processing or sort of take on new products, that's another whole set of infrastructure needs. If they wanted to diversify and not just be a produce farm, but also do livestock or add maple or, do a small kind of dairy operation, that's another whole set of infrastructure that needs that they would have. So I was surprised to see that the infrastructure needs are about the same across meat, maple, produce, and dairy. We didn't do that same kind of projection for the maple industry because we didn't have the same information. But when we talk with the Maple Producers Association and talk with Procter, they acknowledge that there's 3,000 maple producers in the state, and that's probably an underestimation. And so if they each receive $15,000 in grants, we're talking about 45 million in infrastructure needs within the maple industry. So just for comparison, because we didn't have that projection for maple, there's significant infrastructure needs within all of the sectors, regardless of, the per unit value that they get for their product. And I recognize that that's the issue for produce oftentimes is, per bunch of lettuce compared to, a steak of, beef or whatever, but.
Right. And I think that is so helpful. Thank you so much.
Uh-huh.
And the concern lends itself to that matching requirement.
Right, so then from the matching standpoint, I don't know, we haven't finalized kind of the thought behind match. We have never made in the Ag Development Division and in the Working Lands Program match a requirement. So we always have had a match waiver opportunity. So if a business can't come up with the match and that match can be cash or in kind, we accept waivers. And so that's been designed to kind of like level the playing field, but with the intent to have a business make some sort of additional contribution. So we want to show that they're like engaged in the project, they're serious about doing it, there is a real financial need for this, but that they've also, been thoughtful enough and been planning to make this kind of big improvement in their business on their own.
I'm afraid that I have to ask the committee to hold additional questions.
Can I just ask for a piece of information that's not asking?
Well, you're third in line. So let me just ask the committee, if you have critical questions to understanding the amendment that the appropriations is furiously texting me when we get it. So if it's about that, we need to discuss that before I respond to appropriations. If it's about the program, we can certainly ask the Secretary and Abby to come back if they're willing to share our thoughts. Having said that, if it's about the amendment.
So if it's about the amendment, we can speak. Is that the question?
Yes.
But if it's about answering the question as to the guardrails, we hold our.
Let's hold that.
Okay, I'll hold that then.
I mean, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Time constraints.
And you can share with us if there's questions that you want follow-up. I'm happy to.
Yes, please
give you
feel free to
resources.
reach out. Yeah.
I'll back up.
All right. Thank you, committee, for your understanding, and thank you both for coming in.
And thank you for this pleasant surprise in my inbox last night. I was at 5 million and knowing this building is up and down and whatever, but it's a good day that you get it up to. So I appreciate your leadership on that. I know.
Just to be clear, 5 million is where it is.
Right, but you need to,
Yeah.
you're trying to get it to the 8 point.
Well, no, I think that was what we had originally wanted to get it to, but that's where the appropriation was 5 million. So that's.
Oh, so I guess we misunderstood the amendment
Because the amendment
language
says
then.
8.
Oh, they didn't change it.
That was.
Right, it was the old language yesterday that was showing.
One 8 point, and we
I
got,
think it's.
we got bumped to 5.
Well,
Oh,
It should say.
so the appropriates rejected your request.
yes.
Oh, okay. So I was under the assumption you reached
I was
it,
too.
that you headed up there. That was, okay, gotcha. All right, well then it's not great news then.
But it's good news or fair.
That's not great.
We then, before we finish this segment, I just want to check with the committee, and I think we're going to ask Mike to redraft the amendment that we looked at yesterday. And the only change would be the the only change would be including the original language that was in the budget request to allow for up to $125,000, whatever that sentence is. We'll just leave that language right in there. So, thank you. You're free to go.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And Mike, you want to come up to the table? We'll-
Thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
So did I just hear the chair say that the language that was in the original proposal of going up to 125,000 for the max grant is the only change that needs to be added?
Yes, I'm proposing that. And again, we don't have possession of the bill. So this would be another amendment with anybody who chooses to sign on, and I will by default start with the same people who signed on to yesterday's amendment. So the only change would be, instead of basically completely replacing the old language, we're adding our new language, and then we're retaining the section that says up to 125,000. But that's my proposal. Raise your hand if you've got a question, Representative Temple.
Okay, so I thought we weren't putting a cap on the grant amount. What we're doing is putting 125,000 for the staffing.
That's what we are doing, yeah.
Okay, but I'm sorry, I heard him say something about the cap of grants. Or is that my misunderstanding?
No, I did say that.
Okay, you did.
Okay.
Yeah, so that 125 is for the staffing to issue the grants, not to cap the grants. Though I feel like maybe we should put a cap on the grants if they're looking forward to $500,000 grants. I mean, I'm bringing that back out of the dust, because I mean, we're talking about a $5 million program with $500,000 grant. That's only 10. I mean, if it were all, and I know that they said they weren't going to do that, and they're asking for $125,000 staffing amount. There's a bit of inconsistency happening here. I mean,
Representative Graham.
So you just heard too that like meat processing can get up to $500,000 easily in the quick.
yeah, absolutely.
So if you want to support the meat processing, you have to allow some of those larger grants.
I think you also said that the big bottleneck in meat processing is staffing. So, you know, we can build a $500,000 grant program but yeah.
I don't know what you want that money used for, because you don't want to use it for maple, you don't want to use it for meat. I don't know what you want.
You gotta pull out 1.25 million for Maple. Because we're gonna give them, so that doesn't leave a lot left. And I think we have to trust the agency to do 2 tiers and trust them to know how to break that up. Because they're the expert, I'm not an expert. And 500,000 for meat processing seems pretty reasonable. And if they really stick to 2 tiers, maybe we say X number at this level, X number at that level.
Well, maybe I can address what Rodney was and what you were saying. So I'm getting a lot of feedback from my farmer constituents, feeling like there's a lot of money going to the big boys and not a lot going to small farming. Small farming is the backbone of this state. It's the identity of our state. It's what tourists come here to engage in. Rather than these large commodity operations, small farming is what we're about here. And the small farmers are reaching out saying we're being neglected. The agency is really focusing on the large model. So we can trust the agency to do what they're doing, but I think it's still our mandate to give them a direction in how they're going to be spending that money. And I would just like to see it being spread out to as many people as possible. That's just my opinion.
The program overall is for small and medium-sized businesses, and we recognized up front that that wasn't clearly defined, but it is in there as intent. Representative O'Brien.
So Mike, as you described yesterday, deep in the one-time section of the present big bill, is there language about no more than 125 to stand up this program?
Right now, it says in 494, it says an amount not to exceed 125,000 may be used to support the cost of temporary employees to administer the grants.
We just want to move
Pretty
that
clear.
over.
Yeah. That sentence would be just put back in.
Right, I think you would just offer a substitute amendment that is your amendment that's on the calendar today with that sentence added at the end.
So, other thoughts?
I don't know how much time you want to spend on this.
I don't want to spend any time on it, but I also want to, I don't want people to feel like they don't have a chance to say something, because, so go ahead. If you,
So I was just gonna make the argument about, just to David's point about, when we're thinking about meat processing as an example, like that we've heard testimony, not only, I guess maybe less this year, but my own experience from last session, that infrastructure has been an issue and has been enabling small farms to get their meat processed. So there is a, for lack of a better term, trickle down approach with investing in infrastructure at that high level so that it helps the smaller farms have a place, because those are the ones that are really going to be struggling, because they're not going to get the slotting if the infrastructure isn't there, because they're going to be last on the list because they're small. So if they have the ability to get into the facilities because they've made the investment to allow them, in a sense, it is helping them. Just another way to think about that.
I think we hear what you're saying, Dave, and I think well, hopefully the agency hears it too. So I'm going to suggest that unless anybody feels differently, that we'll draft the amendment to include that sentence that Mike just read, and then we'll instruct John to head down to appropriations.
Do a replacement.
Yes, yeah, and they're expecting you, so.
But we should have a vote, because the 9 who signed on need to approve this new amendment to the amendment.
Basically, yeah. So, I mean, we don't need a vote really, because it's not, again, it's the same way we were yesterday. And are the 9 people who signed on yesterday all okay with this?
On board.
Yeah, okay. And then, okay. Good, so you can report that.
I think another thing we could do, just to collectively suggest to the agency, is we could write them a committee letter with some of these thoughts and say, it's really important, it's not in statute, but it's really important that these are the priorities of this 5 million grant.
Yeah, and there is language in the amendment that
Right, small and medium, and then they have the ability to set criteria for the parameters, I think is the exact term.
and then the language that's in the amendment that was pulled from the letter talks about, I mean, it was language that you drafted, so you can read it better than I remember it, but the secretary shall determine that there is an interest.
Right.
Et cetera, et cetera. So, but yes, I think we can certainly follow up with more. Dave.
I'm just curious, maybe this isn't our privy, but of the 9 who signed on, who are the 2 who didn't?
Charles and Rodney.
Can I ask why? Or do we have time for that?
I think maybe let's do that offline.
Okay, very good.
All right.
So, Mike, you're gonna get the new and improved amendment?
Yeah, I'm gonna do it. I'll bring it back up here in the next 5 minutes. I do have to go to House Ed though at 11.
Can you email it to John and to the rest of us if you